The account that we made public yesterday gives a detailed explanation of what happened in that apartment. I stand wholeheartedly behind it as absolutely accurate.
There is one inconsistency in, well, for example...
I do not intend to quibble about that account.
You intend to get the truth?
The account that we gave of the events is the truth.
That is the voice of a Ed Hanrahan, the state's attorney in 1969. On December 4th of that year, in the wee hours of the morning, the police raided a house filled with Black Panthers in it. In one of the rooms was a pregnant woman sleeping. Right next to her was a 21-year-old by the name of Fred Hampton. When the police finished their mission, they did the mistake of not covering up their job. They left the scene in smiles. If this shit is lies, God strike me. They left the door open and all the evidence for everyone to see.
There was a picture of the inside of the door to the bathroom. Yes, that door, our reporters discovered, corresponded to one on the front living room adjoining the bedroom. There were holes in the door. When the door was open, those holes corresponded to holes that were in the wall adjoining between the bedroom and the living room. And when they stuck a stick through the holes, they all matched up. I make no evaluation of the pictures other than to say they portray conditions as they existed in that apartment at the time those pictures were taken.
The police lied, and Ed Hanrahan tried to recreate the scene with his own version of events. He said that the Panthers shot at the police officers as soon as they announced themselves. He also said that the Panthers refused to cease fire after the police urged them to several times. All lies. The police shot 100 bullets into their house. Only one bullet came from inside the house. It was a bullet from the shotgun of Mark Clark, the only Panther awake. And the shot only went off because Mark got shot and the gun fell. Everyone knew that the police was lying at the time. All the evidence made it obvious that it was an assassination. What people didn't know was that at the time, the FBI set the whole thing up. Welcome to Loud Silence, a podcast about America's discreet history. This is a second generation production. I'm Danny Borbin, and this is Cointelpro episode 1. I'm going to release an episode every 2 weeks, but if you enjoy this and love facts that come with biased opinions, follow me on Twitter at dbrando214. You might regret it, but I promise everything I tweet is Googleable.
I tell people what I do for a living. They think, well, that figures.
I started this podcast because I want to point out the things that was kept from us intentionally. I also want to point out the information that the mass media manipulates and distorts. I want to talk about the history that this country is afraid to acknowledge or refuses to acknowledge. In all my years of grade school, all the way to freshman year of college, I only had one teacher that didn't teach the school's curriculum. That teacher still has an impact on me and the way I think today. I think we all remember almost all of our teachers, even the bad ones. But those who have an impact on you stay with you forever. Now, I'm not going to lie. I've been wanting to do this for a while. History has always been my favorite subject, and it still fascinates me how much it repeats, or even rhymes, I should say. But it was a meme that was so silly and so sad and so funny that made me think, God damn, that's really how our schools taught us history. I feel like I really have to say something. And the meme goes like this.
American history books are like, slavery was bad, but then Lincoln fixed it. Then, segregation was also bad, but Malcolm X didn't need to be so mean about it. But MLK went on a big walk and fixed racism. The last racist left killed him. But then he went to jail. The end.
That's really how some of our teachers really talk, by the way. Now, before I get into this, I just want to let you know that this is sad. This is very sad, and there's some violence in here. And I also want to let you know that to talk in depth about Cointelpro takes more than just 30 to 60 minutes. I can't name every person the FBI killed and talk about every single thing they did. So I'm only gonna highlight some of the major things that I think we should know that most of us don't. and I'm going to try my best to not bore you. So let's do it. In 1971, 16 years after we went to Vietnam, not 6 or 10, on the night of the fight of the century with Ali and Frazier, a group of anti-war activists broke into the offices of the Selective Service System and the FBI. Their plan was to go in there and destroy all of the files of the Selective Service System. But when they discovered thousands of these FBI files, they came across what is known as Cointelpro. And instead of burning these files, they leaked it to the press. After the news broke, it later led to the first congressional investigation of U.S. intelligence agencies in the country's history. The FBI closed up almost 500 of their small agencies around the nation. They were basically scrambling.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm. What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure? Stay calm! Wait. Everybody calm down!
COINTELPRO stands for Counterintelligence Program. They called it a program, but it was more like a war on any progressive movement, a war on people of color. It was a subversion. Now, I know people these days think that everything is political. Whether it's a fact or an opinion, people do not want to have these conversations that makes the truth sound like it's against their beliefs. But when someone says this country was built on white supremacy, that is not political talk, nor is it an opinion. It is a hard fact. Now, just a quick note. COINTELPRO also had files on the KKK, but I want to get something straight. It was after last on their priority list. Compared to the Black Panther Party and other left movements, they did almost nothing when it came to the KKK. In fact, the FBI sent newsletters to the KKK saying quit the Klan and join our boys in Vietnam. And it makes total sense. Okay, listen, the FBI was put in place to protect the United States from enemies trying to infiltrate the country's structure. Basically, protect America the way it already was. And in the 50s and 60s, people were waking up. People were sick and tired of the racism and the sexism and whatever it was that was running through this country's veins. So what the FBI does is protects that structure. They try to protect that racism and sexism and segregation and homophobia, etc., etc. You know.
I know you know. All right? And I know you know I know you know.
COINTELPRO started in 1956 and lasted until the year it was discovered, which is a blip in this country's ugly history. A repetitive blip. It was a secret operation. Why? Because it was illegal. It went against everything this country swears it stands by.
We're dealing also with the FBI, a law enforcement agency in this country. And if the law enforcement agencies that are charged with enforcing the law don't themselves obey the law, then who will? Our problem with the CIA has not had to do with its foreign operations, but has had to do with violations of the law, which says that the CIA stays out of the domestic affairs of the United States. There was a real purpose for that. The purpose was trying to preserve a free society and not let an intelligence agency in the name of national security begin to erode away the foundations of freedom in our own land.
That was Frank Church, a senator from Idaho. He spearheaded the COINTELPRO investigations, which was later known as the Church Committee. COINTELPRO was J. Edgar Hoover's thing, and it ran through 4 administrations. The program's intention was to, quote-unquote, neutralize leaders and organizations and independence movements. It was to stop people of color from increasing these movements that were picking up speed towards freedom and equality. Now, I'm going to focus mostly on the Black Panther Party, but just know I say people of color because COINTELPRO also targeted many other groups. I'm talking about the Puerto Rican independence movement. That's including the Young Lords. They targeted the women's movement. They targeted students and anyone who opposed the war. Even Muhammad Ali. They targeted the American Indian movement, the Mexican Chicano movement, and so on and so on. And a lot of these movements, by the way, learned a lot of their tactics from the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Panther Party.
We use the Black Panther as our symbol because the nature of a panther. A panther doesn't strike anyone, but when he's assailed upon, that he'll back up first. But if the aggressor continues, then he'll strike out.
Of the 300 COINTELPRO operations, almost 245 of them were towards the Black Panther Party. I'm going to read to you one of the goals that J. Edgar Hoover wrote in a memo sent to FBI offices across the nation. It was number 2 on the memo, and it went like this. prevent the rise of a messiah. The messiah is in quotes, by the way, who can unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad all aspire to this position. Elijah Muhammad is less of a threat because of his age. King could be a very real contender for this position should he abandon his supposed obedience to white liberal doctrines, parentheses nonviolence, and embrace black nationalism. Carmichael has the necessary charisma to be a real threat in this way. Here's Bill Clinton at John Lewis's funeral on July 30th in the year 2020.
There were 2 or 3 years there where the movement went a little bit too far towards Stokely, but in the end, John Lewis prevailed.
Shut the fuck, shut.
Here's an excerpt from number 4 in that memo. You must discredit those groups and individuals to, first, the responsible Negro community. Second, they must be discredited to the white community, both to the responsible community and to liberals who have vestiges of sympathy for militant black nationalists simply because they are Negroes. Third, they must be discredited in the eyes of Negro radicals, the followers of the black movement.
FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover today asserted that of the black extremist groups, the Black Panthers represent the greatest internal threat to the nation.
The FBI's main goal was to infiltrate, divide, and conquer. How did they do this? They did it like any other war. They used America's best and most powerful weapon, the media. They used informants. They used psychological warfare. They used chemical warfare. And like you heard earlier, they used police to carry out assassinations. Now, I quoted that word neutralize a little earlier because in Cointelpro, it specifically listed black leaders to be neutralized. We're talking about all black leaders, even the ones we actually learn about in school. I mean, they had tons of files on James Baldwin. And I know we all know about all the wiretaps they had on the King of Love. And if you don't know about the letter, the FBI literally sent a letter to MLK suggesting he kills himself. And MLK wasn't the only public figure Hoover targeted. Presidents and senators feared J. Edgar Hoover for that. They thought he had dirt on all of them. And in most cases, he did. In a sense, Hoover was untouchable. He was in power for almost 50 years. And what we don't realize until after 1971 is how effective him and the FBI and the CIA were on taking down these black leaders one by one.
Bocce went to Oakland and met up with Huey and Bobby and David Hilliard, and they met Bocce. They said, oh man, we got to have an LA chapter.
Bunchy Carter was a Slauson, a popular gang in the streets of LA at the time. He was considered a natural leader. They called him the mayor of the ghetto. And at the time, a lot of gang members moved to political parties. Bunchy was able to bring a lot of Slausons into the Black Panther Party. But other gang members went to other organizations, like the US organization, United Slaves, which was a much more laid-back group than the Black Panthers. They were less confrontational. So what the FBI did was pit these organizations against each other. They created a correspondence propaganda that made it seem like both parties were sending each other these cruel messages. They sent false letters. They created political cartoons. They essentially created attention and blew it up as much as they could. So when the FBI botched a drug setup to try and kill Bunchy Carter and John Huggins, they tried it a second time with US members and succeeded.
At the University of California at Los Angeles, 2 Black Panthers were shot to death during a black students' meeting on the campus last Friday.
The FBI took credit for these murders, and some agents even bragged about it. They thought the operations were so successful that they should keep doing it. And they did. In May the same year, another Black Panther by the name of John Savage was killed by another US member. A couple of months later, Sylvester Bell was killed, another Black Panther killed by another US member, all drawn up by the FBI or informants to the FBI.
You think that you better than them? You ain't no better than none of them other cops. In fact, you the same as them. You are them.
The Black Panthers at one point had a coloring book. This coloring book showed slave owners and police as mean and ugly pigs. The creator of the book, Akinsanyas Cambone, said that the pigs can be any color, hence why it's a coloring book, but they are mostly interpreted as white people. The book was actually pretty gruesome because it shows women and men and children stabbing and shooting the pigs. The leaders of the Black Panther Party thought it went too far and it was too much, so they ordered him to stop making it and destroy what was already made. And of course, the FBI gets their hands on one of them. And when they do, the FBI makes copies before the Black Panthers destroy it. And they hand them out. They hand them out pretending it's the Black Panther Party who's distributing these coloring books to children. That, of course, wasn't good in the public side. And this is just one of the many tactics that they used.
On April 2nd of 1969, I was rearrested along with 21 other members of the Black Panther Party on charges of conspiracy to murder some pigs, and attacks against our party still escalated.
That was Joanne Byrd of the Black Panther Party. She was falsely arrested with 20 other members on a crazy amount of charges. Tupac's mother was also one of the people arrested. I'll tell you a little bit more about her in a second. But 13 of them lasted up to 2 years in prison. This was known as the Panther 21 case. They were accused of planning and planting bombs in precincts throughout New York City. In May of 1971, all 156 charges were dropped. But what that case did was pretty much destroy New York's chapter of the party. And although they were acquitted, it was another successful ploy by the FBI to get rid of black leadership. That case not only crippled the party financially, but it created tensions between the party leaders. Now, a quick word on Assata Shakur. Assata Shakur received political asylum in Cuba in the 1980s after escaping from prison. She was added to the FBI's most wanted list in the year 2013. What is that? Almost 40 years or something of what? You're adding a 60-something-year-old to your most wanted list for ceremony purposes?
Why?
Shortly after MLK was killed, Eldridge Cleaver, the party's Minister of Information, gets into a shootout with the police. The youngest member of the party at the time, Bobby Hunton, was with Eldridge Cleaver. He was killed when he came out of the basement with his hands up, surrendering. If I'm not mistaken, he had a white shirt in his hand, or he had no shirt, so he can show that the police that he had no weapon on him. Eldridge was supposed to turn himself in on November 28th, 1968, but he was nowhere to be found. So he escapes to Algeria and starts the international chapter of the Black Panther Party.
Your Minister of Information is now in exile, Eldridge Cleaver. You speak with him often on the phone, is that correct?
Well, you know I do. They tap the phones. The phone is probably hooked up to the White House.
That was David Hilliard, the chief of staff of the Black Panther Party. By the time Huey comes out of jail, Eldridge and Huey and David aren't on the same page. Problems that most likely even started by Hoover. But there were disagreements about what should be done next. How should the party be ran? Disagreements on where the party stands politically. Even questions about the Panther 21 case and the legal fees. How much of that actually was towards the Panther 21. So Huey basically kicks out the Panther 21, and Eldridge doesn't like that. It doesn't sit right with him. J. Edgar Hoover, of course, gets word of this and takes advantage by sending more divisive letters to one another. Huey goes on a show to lower the noise that the turmoil within the party is making. And on the show, they call Eldridge. Right before Eldridge hangs up, they ask him if he has any last words before he goes. Eldridge mentions the expulsion of the Panther 21, and he points out that it's a mistake what they're doing by expelling them. He basically states that the party is falling apart. And Huey did not like that one bit, because Huey's goal was to go on the show and show the public that they were all on the same page. So 10 minutes later, they call Eldridge back.
Mr. Cleaver? Yes? Just hold on. Eldridge. Hey, what's happening? y'all this morning. Well, very embarrassing for me. So I'm warning you now, or notifying you, that the intercommunal section, you hear?
Yeah?
The intercommunal section is expelled.
That's not the best way to deal with that.
Well, this is the way I'm going to deal with it.
Well, then I think you're a madman too, brother.
But I'm not a coward like you, brother, because you run off to get little Bobby Hutton killed. But I stay here and face the gas, you see? So you're a coward and you're a punk. You understand?
I think you've lost your ability to reason, brother.
Hey, brother, you heard when I call you, that's what I feel about you now. You're a punk.
Bobby Seale, co-founder of the Black Panther Party, was invited in August of 1968 to speak at the famous Democratic Convention in Chicago. This was 5 months after the King of Love was killed and almost 2 months after Robert F. Kennedy was killed. So tensions were already high. It was a violent year. By the time this convention finished, riots broke out. 668 protesters were arrested and hundreds of people were injured. Bobby Seale finished his speech and left. He had absolutely nothing to do with the riots, but he was later arrested and charged with conspiracy and crossing state lines to incite a riot, along with 7 others. This was later known as the Chicago 8, but Bobby Seale's case became separate from the others. 7 people were sentenced for contempt of court, and 5 were also found guilty for crossing state lines and inciting a riot. Bobby Seale had to spend every day in jail during the trial, while the others didn't. Bobby Seale's lawyer was in the hospital at the time, so he couldn't represent Bobby. So Bobby asked the judge, Julius Hoffman, if he could represent himself. The judge refused. And this is what made this trial so popular, because Bobby was denied his constitutional right to defend himself, and he did not stay quiet. Whenever his name was mentioned in court, he'd jump out of his chair and curse at the judge. He'd call him a racist pig and a fascist. So what did the judge do? Charged him with contempt. What else did he do? Something real racist and fascy. I think I might have just made that word up. Anyways, he shackled his feet and gagged him. It went on like this for 3 to 4 days. And this is just another thing that the FBI had their hands in. Outside the courtrooms, though, it was a scene. It was mayhem. People from all over the city came to support Bobby Seale and voice their opinions on this cruelty that was happening. And on one day, a 20-year-old kid steps up to the podium.
I just want to tell you that the chairman of the Black Panther Party is going to be ungagged, and they're going to have to take those chains off. Bobby Seale is going through all types of physical and mental torture. But that's all right, because we said even before this happened, and we're going to say it after this, and after I'm locked up, and after everybody's locked up, that you can jail revolutionaries, but you can't jail a revolution.
Fred Hampton was the deputy chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. Most people say he was the heart and soul of the party. To the FBI, he was the quote-unquote messiah that they feared most. Fred Hampton had the ability to bring all types of people together. He had everyone's ear when he spoke.
We didn't talk about a Breakfast for Children program. We've got one. We're not going to tell you how many kids we intend to feed and speed in Chicago. We're feeding 3,000 to 4,000 every week already, and I don't know how many all around the country.
He was building a following throughout the entire nation. He brought the youth together. He brought gangs together. He brought movements together. He brought all oppressed movements and races together.
We say white power to white people. Brown power to brown. Yellow power to yellow people. Black power to black people. We say Panther power to the Vanguard party.
He was a talented dude. And once Hoover got word that Hampton was meeting with and organizing with white people, like the hillbillies and student organizations and the working class, Hoover set in motion a death squad, basically. When the police raided Hampton's apartment, Hampton's bodyguard was not there. That was because Hampton's bodyguard was an FBI informant. It was him that gave the FBI the floor plan to where they were staying, and it was him that drugged Hampton right before leaving him to die in that apartment.
Heard the pig say he's barely alive, he'll barely make it. I assume they were talking about Sheriff Fred. Then they started shooting pigs, they started shooting up, shooting again. I heard the sister scream. They stopped shooting. Pig said he's good and dead now.
4 days after they murdered Fred Hampton, they tried to do the same with Geronimo Pratt, another Black Panther leader.
The public at large has a hard time understanding how often innocent people are wrongly convicted.
The Los Angeles Police Department, the DA's office, and the FBI were determined that Pratt should stay behind bars.
Geronimo Pratt, a Vietnam vet, a Purple Heart recipient, was another target that needed to be neutralized. The LAPD literally waged war on the LA chapter of the Black Panther Party. They closed down the street and besieged a Black Panther Party office with a SWAT team and snipers on the roof. And everything. I mean, they had helicopters, dogs. They even tried to bomb the place. What the police didn't know was that Geronimo trained some members on how to defend themselves and the places where they stayed. So they fortified the office and fought back. It was a true standoff. Eventually, the Panthers surrendered, but that wasn't enough for Hoover and his comrades. They threw the book at Geronimo. They threw him an unsolved murder case in Santa Monica and gave him a life sentence. What was their evidence? An informant's testimony.
I was on the squad. I know he was framed.
That was Wesley Swearingen, a former FBI special agent. Eventually, because of the FBI's own telephone tap, they realized that Geronimo was in another city at the time of the murder. Geronimo served 27 years and died shortly after living in Tanzania. He was 63 years old. A quick FYI, on August 7th in the year 2020, Derek Ingram, co-founder of the activist group Warriors in the Garden, was besieged inside of his apartment. The NYPD closed off the entire street. They showed up in riot gear. They bought dogs. They even had their helicopters there. And guess what? They had no warrant. You know what he did? They showed up to arrest him because he yelled at an officer with a megaphone.
Don't hurt me, Arch. I'm only little.
The Black Panthers, as we all know, were destroyed as an organization through these illegal FBI operations. And certainly the CIA violated the privacy and the rights of thousands upon thousands of Americans through the illegal operations which they agreed to do under Richard Helms as director.
If the police are making decisions in a society, whether it's today or 1950 or 1968, whenever, that means we are in a police state. That does not happen in a democracy.
Yes, this is American justice. Yes, that's right. This is American democracy. Yes, and those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy. Right. Now, if I'm wrong, put me in jail. But if you can't prove that a democracy is not hypocrisy, then don't put your hands on me.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's just a fact. In 2020, America is in a kleptocracy. This isn't a democracy, nor is it a plutocracy, which is what has been my entire time on this earth.
Remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder, treason, and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot.
Before I go, I just want to state that although I pointed out some of the operations or missions or whatever you want to call it that the FBI did, I want to say that the FBI also targeted and harassed the woman in the Black Panther Party heavily. The woman who essentially carried the party during these times. I also want to point out the woman we never hear about, the woman in the 30s and 40s, the woman in the 50s who created a movement before MLK was even known. I'm talking about a woman who made it happen. women in the Southern Negro Youth Congress, the Montgomery bus boycotts, which, by the way, in the 1950s, 90% of all black women were domestic workers. It wasn't only Rosa Parks refusing to ride from poor black communities to affluent white neighborhoods. A lot of these historic facts get buried because look who's writing them. Look who's in charge. The fact that the KKK still isn't a terrorist organization tells you everything you need to know about this country's progress, and this country's regression. Another thing I want to point out, which is the most important, is that not a single person has ever been punished for the roles they played in the Cointelpro program.
Oh, fuck you! Fuck the lot of you! Fuck you all!
And a not so fun fact, the FBI's headquarters is still named the J. Edgar Hoover Building. Oh, and one more thing. All lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Regardless of what these people think we should do. Because school is not important